Hi and welcome to Workforce Planning again. This is one of the extra bits, the course X, and this is a session 6 on metrics. It should be applicable to almost any topic in workforce planning, but is specifically set here to be really as part of the wrapped hub course, but you can fit it into other elements as well. I'm Colin Nuri. I run Carados, which is a management training and development company. We focus on building skills in frontline health and care workers in all sorts of topics, but workforce planning is a key one. And workforce planning is important to us, not just because of the courses, but also because of a tool that we provide and support with our colleagues in the WRAPT team. It's the Workforce Repository and Planning Tool. It is a free-to-use online secure workforce modelling tool based in Lancashire and South Cumbria NHS Foundation Trust, where we're hosted, commissioned by Health Education England. And it is a tool supported by these guys which stores workforce in a workforce repository to give you a current state and allows you to do some what-if scenario analysis for your future state. Really helpful for workforce redesign and can be very helpful when it comes to a hub as well. Our approach to development, as we talk about every time because it's important, is that whilst we provide free tools and techniques, including these courses, including the WRAP tool, including the pretty much free but not quite bumper book of workforce planning available on Amazon from July. We also recommend that you bring capacity to this because it's not just good enough just to be able to watch this for 45 minutes or whatever and think, yeah, I've got it. You really need a chance to practice it. For that, you need a project to work on. And you need the support of your organisation to do that, so that they support the time you spend doing this work, as well as make sure that the work you're doing is relevant to their executive agenda. So always worth making sure you've got a project to work on that is supported by your business, and then feel free to use our free tools and techniques however you want. So this is course X6 on metrics. Before I go into it, there are a number of extra courses that are available. I think the only one that's not yet recorded is X5, which is the wrapped course, which Fiona and Amina of the WRAP team are going to record. That'll probably be a couple of courses, in fact. We've also got extra ones on the 7 R's of workforce planning and stuff on data, how to facilitate a workshop, and how to undertake sort of process mapping and workforce planning. So, but this is course X6, which is on metrics. So we've agreed that workforce planning is about getting the right people with the right skills, behaviours and attitudes in the right place at the right time to meet demand. That is the aim of workforce planning. And we want to design metrics that make sure we are heading towards that goal. What we will have done is put in place plans and actions which will move us from a known current state to a planned future state, and we'll know that those actions are important, and we will have set certain expectations in terms of what we're going to achieve, and some of those could be in the form of metrics. In addition to that, general metrics are helpful to help us understand whether the actions that we are having in different areas are having impacts in other areas for good or for bad. It's no good whacking down a problem in one area for it only to appear in another area. So maintaining a wide base of metrics is a good idea. So metrics can be used specifically for projects, or they can be used environmentally to see whether what we're doing is having an impact elsewhere. Now, we quite often get asked, right, we need some metrics for our workforce program. And you go, well, you can't just have metrics, because we like being difficult in workforce planning. You really need to base your metrics on what you're trying to achieve. And that should be based on a logic model that shows how anything we do impacts a metric change, and that metric change, how that affects our overall goal. So we'll talk about logic models in a second. When we are looking at metrics, we can look at the impacts we are having on that team, as well as looking at the team itself. So when we're going to be talking about things, I'll be using the 7 R's, and I'll also be using the 1 T in this case, which will be the team. So we'll look at the current team, and we'll look at recruitment, retention. We're looking about getting people to return to work. We'll talk about re-energising people, which means we get more outcomes per person. We'll look about redesigning roles, and processes, replacing people, which is a short section, and retraining people. So there's a whole host of things that we can look at. But these are all things we're expecting to see. These are changes we're expecting to make, and they cover the range of projects that we're doing. So hopefully there'll be some metrics in here as we go through. So a logic model. Now, I'm no expert in logic models, and there are some really good people out there that really understand logic models in detail. But what I'm really trying to say to you is you're trying to work out why you are putting in place each metric. And the way you do that is to work out a plausible story of the change. So what are you expecting to happen? And then what will that change be? Okay, so what are you expecting to happen? And then what will the impact of that change be? So from a workforce point of view, you've got to think about, I am going to, I have something I want to deal with, something I want to sort out. And in sorting that problem out, there are going to be various impacts that we have along the way. And therefore we can see, well, what's the impact we're going to have. So you could start with an input that you're having, that you start with. You have activities that you want to address. Okay, the activities that you want to do, steps that you're going to take. Those activities will have outputs that you need to think about. So what are the things that will be specifically produced by that activity? When we have undertaken that activity, when we've had that output, what is the outcome we expect from it? And what will change, and therefore what impact do we expect? So what will change, and how much do we think it will change by as a result of the changes that we're making? Okay, so just taking that again, we might have the issue that we're trying to address. These are the things. This is the current situation we're trying to solve. We're going to set some actions up, some activities that are going to solve that. What are the things that we're going to do that's going to solve that? When we do those things, that will have outputs. Those outputs, or the activity itself, will have outcomes. And what do we expect those outcomes to be? We have to think about this stuff. We have to think through logically, what impact do we expect to have on when we attempt to address a problem. The way you go about doing that is to build a logic model, and the typical approach taken to doing that is around collecting information on the problem by talking to as many people as possible, really understanding what that problem is, describing that problem, defining these elements in terms of thinking through, okay, the inputs, the activities, the outputs, and the outcomes, and the impacts, and then build that model in terms of understanding what you think the impact will be. So for every change input-wise, what do we think the impact will be? And then check that and make sure we think that is right. There are all sorts of things you can do around logic models. I don't want to make life harder than it needs to be. This slide should really just be about, look, think about the metrics before you put them in place, because it's no good just having a random set of metrics in. I mean, yes, there is a point, obviously, because they look great and people can look at them and you can ooh and ah at them in a people board, but it's not going to do you any good. Metrics should be based on a plausible story that links the actions that you're taking and the problem you're trying to solve to something changing. Okay, and that will be our metric. There are all sorts of metrics we can look at, all sorts of metrics, and I'm going to go through a huge list of them, but you can have all sorts of variations on metrics, which means there's a whole load of things you can think about. You can think about metrics, you can think about any of your metrics versus plan. Okay, so if one of our metrics was bank and agency spend, we can look at that versus plan. We can look at that in overall numbers. So what's our overall amount of bank and agency spend? We can look at that by type of staff. So what's our bank and agency spend for nurses, for specific types of nurse, for GPs, for social workers, for specific types of social workers, etc. Okay, we can do it by grade. Okay, of staff. So there could be a specific type of staff, but then we can do it within bands or within grades as well. Okay, or we could do it in a combination of staff and grade, or we can do them by grade and by staff on their own. We can do this stuff by organisation, so we can think about it by whereabouts is it happening. We can even do it by location. We could do it with a focus on specific, very, very specific areas as well. So we could be absolutely picking out, rather than looking at all staff groups or whatever else, we can pick individual staff groups. We can pick on individual areas in any of these areas. It could be bank and agency spend on nurses in Shrewsbury for SAT, for example. Okay, so we can look at things very, very specifically in terms of where we want to look at things. So metrics can be very, very variable in terms of the way you want to do it, but lots of variations on it. But as I said to you before, the metric will be based around the change that you're expecting to have. And we'll sort of investigate that kind of change we're expecting to have and which ones we want as we go through. So I'm going to take you through a whole host of different ones that we're going to go through here, okay? But before we start, let's look at the team to start with, because the 7 R's are one, but the team itself is something which represents something that exists. It's the thing that exists, and therefore it's the thing that you can manage and monitor quite a lot. So there's lots of example metrics you can use. I will not have come up with all of them here. I'll keep adding to this list as we go through. Store some of this stuff for people to look at. But the key ones are quite often we've got vacancies. So that's where we have a vacancy. So something we're trying to recruit to. Vacancies can be a bit flawed though, because that doesn't mean there is a need for that vacancy for a start. That will come more between the gap between demand and capacity. It's just we're allowed to recruit. We might not really want to recruit because we don't feel we need them, but we've got a vacancy against our establishment. We can also look. You can also, from a vacancy point of view, not have a vacancy even though you need one, because you know for well it's not worth putting in for a vacancy because you're never going to recruit to it anyway. So what's the bother? So vacancies themselves can be a bit dangerous and they're not quite what we want. But that's probably said of any data. So hey, go with it. The gap between demand and capacity can be a bit more of a clear one. Which is, as it says there, anything that indicates that could be backlogs, or it could just be, again, they're dangerous with backlogs because does that show activity or does it show demand? But anyway, you can show the gap between demand, as in what the real demand for the service is, and what the capacity is, will be a great indicator in terms of whether your workforce changes are having an impact or not. Okay. Of course, if you're going to do that, you also need to understand demand overall and capacity overall, because if demand is going up, that gap might be going up, and it's no fault of yours. That's something else that is happening. So it's worth understanding the gap between demand and capacity, but also understanding changes in demand as part of that as we go through, and whether that demand has gone up in line with what we were expecting, etc. Bank and agency, the old classic there, the one I've mentioned already, great one to do. Could be bank, could be agency, could be bank and agency. Not always bad. Bank and agency is a percentage. You want to maintain a percentage of flexible staff in any organisation where demand is flexible. But you might want to bring that number down. Staff satisfaction, absolutely critical for morale, and that may have an impact on other things. You may have the diversity of the team there. So indicators around any indicators of diversity against the general population that we have. Diversity is massively important in a team when you're trying to get the right things in place. You help to match your service users is important. But also, if you haven't got a diverse team, are you really recruiting from the right pool? Are you recruiting from a big enough pool, and therefore are you getting the right staff in that you could get in, the best staff that you could get in? So I think it's an important consideration as you go. You can also look at activity per person as well. Now, these aren't the only things you can do for a team. I've just got some of the others in other areas like sickness and everything else. But that's in the re-energize section. But this is these are classic team metrics. Activity per person is in this particular case an efficiency rating. How busy are people? Now then, when this range here automatically gives us a view when we're thinking of our logic model. Because if, for example, we are thinking of introducing a new band and recruiting 50 of that band, we'll talk about recruitment in a second and how we know we're doing that right, we would expect the vacancies to go down. We would expect the gap between demand and capacity to go down. We would expect the use of bank and agency to go down. We would hope the staff satisfaction was going up. We would expect the diversity of the team to improve against a picture of where you want to be compared to where you are. You would hope that activity per person, you might expect it to go up or down actually. If those people are cheaper, you might expect that to be going down. We don't know. But you'll need to consider what impacts you want on all of these. It is also possible, of course, that these might have other effects, and that helps you to spot them. So bringing in more people, does that bring staff satisfaction down? because people don't know what these new people are and it's upsetting the status quo, etc. So all sorts of things to think about in terms of metrics for the team. Right, then, so we talked about the 7 R's. One of the 7 R's is recruit. So it's the old classic one. This is the effectiveness of bringing people in. So if we are recruiting, we might want to know, is recruitment on track versus the plan? In general, how many people have we recruited in total and how many have recruited versus the plan? Great metric to have, makes people feel a whole lot better. But then you're also going to have to think of retention. Are we recruiting them or going away? I once saw a place where there were lots of nurses had been recruited from abroad. They were wandering around looking completely lost in a very cold part of the UK. And I was looking there thinking, I'm not sure how many of those people, given they're not supported and given that they appear to have that expectation of what they're going to be doing, how long they would be retained in that organisation or whether they would leave quickly. So recruitment needs to also consider retention. You might want to look at candidate conversion at each stage. So how many did we convert at each stage of the recruitment process, from sending out the invite all the way through to recruitment. We might want to look at the hire to reach productivity time. So when we recruit people, how long does it take them to be at certain different levels of productivity? And obviously that will have an impact on the productivity numbers. We might want to look at the diversity of the recruit pool and the diversity potentially at each stage. That will help us to spot whether people from diverse backgrounds are finding it harder to get through the process or not for whatever reason, or the other way around. We might look at cost per hire, and we might look at the candidate satisfaction as they go through every aspect of the process, even if they get told they're not suitable, what their satisfaction is, so that we may get them back again more easily. So a number of different things you can think of from a recruit point of view. If you want more of these, there are specialist recruitment metric sites which have all sorts of different things you might want to put in for recruitment. And as I say, retention, absolutely important. So a few things in here. So you've got your turnover retention rates. So you've got how many people are we? What's our actual turnover at the moment compared to what we want? We can also look theoretically. Sometimes you can look at where those people go. So they might turn over, but they might turn over within your organisation for good reasons or whatever else. But so turnover is not always bad, but you might want to monitor it. How many employees recommend this is a great place to work? It sits often within the staff survey. I think it's a great indicator, and it helps us understand whether they're going to retain. We can have ease of access to employee benefits, can be assessed. So how many people are accessing employee benefits? How many people say they can access those employee benefits if we're seeing those as a way of retaining people? The last time the employee was recognised, that can also include last time an employee was reviewed. Their view compared to the management views are always interesting because there's always a gap, or often a gap. But certainly the last time that employee was recognised is an interesting indicator. Your internal hiring mechanism effectiveness, so all the stuff we talked about recruitment, you can also look at that in terms of moving people between different roles within the organisation. Hippos in voluntary turnover, hippos being a high impact person, I think, but really you can have a look at how many people, high impact people are we losing in turnover, and theoretically in voluntary turnover as well, if we're doing individual voluntary turnover schemes at any point, or voluntary redundancy schemes. Having a look at the high impact people, the people that you'd absolutely want to keep forever, how much of those are going through, obviously targeting levers, interviews at those people. Actually should everybody, but it always helps to target at those as well. And the diversity of turnover, so if we're recruiting a diverse workforce and that people are leaving quickly, that indicates that something is wrong. Retraining, so training people to do new roles is another one, and a few things here. So the impact of training after 30 days, so obviously you can always get people to do a survey immediately they have been trained, but that's not always the best way to do it, because people tend to be quite nice immediately afterwards. Helping them to assess the impact of any training they've had after 30 days can help us to indicate whether the training that we did is having the effect we expected it to be. L&D participation. L&D is learning and development, so it's participation in e-learning and other courses that are available, and any return on investment information against that learning and development is important as well. We can look at a skill matrix. We can keep a skill matrix every year and look at how that improves. Judging by, again, you can look at that in terms of how many skills people are getting, how much better they're getting in those skills, whether how much better or how many more skills we're getting in the targeted areas, etc. And then looking at any training backlog, because that's going to hit us if there's a training backlog. That'll be something we'll need to assess, because we're not training everybody we wanted to train. Replace is another one, always an interesting one. The impact of replacing staff with automation or equipment. This is a bit like the redesign one. We can have a look at the impact of that change that we've had on efficiency. So yeah, it's all very well making the change because we all thought it was a good idea. Having a look at the impact on efficiency afterwards would be a good idea, because we can either improve things to get us more in line with where we expect it to be, or if it's proved to be a bad idea and we've reduced efficiency, well, sometimes we might have to be brave and go back a bit. But looking at that impact of change on efficiency and trying to improve it is important, and also looking at the impact of change on other staff. So not just our own staff, but other staff. And I guess going back to the logic model, you might want to think about, whenever you're thinking through the logic model, what unexpected impacts might you have in other areas that you might also want to monitor for good or bad. This would be impact of those specific, not those specific staff that have been replaced, but what's the impact of the change on other people? Are they getting less efficient as a result of this, etc. Percentage of staff redeployed, because we've replaced staff and we want to keep our good workers. So what percentage of those staff were redeployed in other areas? And linked to that, the employability of exiting workers. We can look at how quickly they got other jobs. Did they get other jobs within our organisation, within the health sector? That helps us to understand whether they were good people and our development had been important for those people. Work is such a key part of what people do that caring about those individuals, even as they leave, can be very important. From a re-energized point of view, so this is the one where we get the best out of the people that we have. There's a whole host of different things we can cover here. If I take it back out of it, wellness, any indicators that we can do around wellness are interesting. Not an area of mine that I'm particularly strong on, but it will also depend on the wellness. So from the worst numbers, like take up of various schemes is one thing that we might want to go to. So take up of gym memberships, because that's what wellness always means. Take up of yoga classes, number of things offered, all of that sort of stuff. But indicators of people's wellness themselves, how resilient people feel themselves, etc. Things to work at. For me, it's a dangerous area. I think you're looking at you're into people's how people are feeling at times, and those questions are best asked carefully, and the answers equally carefully listened to. So worth engaging your wellness leads and thinking out what indicators can we have. One of the things often about re-energizing is you've got absence and you've got long-term absence, and these are two different things you want to look at in terms of how does it work. Absence, you can use the Bradford Index if you want, or you can just look at number of absences or number of days absence or percentage of absence. The long-term absence, though, is a slightly different indicator, I think, because long-term absence often tends to be it's different and it's longer, obviously. It takes up a lot more time. It's actually ironically less impactful than somebody being absent a lot, so keep them separately. Non-productive effort is an interesting one to look at. So what percentage of their time are people non-productive? This can be all sorts of different things. So we can look at the percentage of time spent on things that are not the core activities. We can also look at things like and I pray this is the area that's supposed to be in. We can also look at areas like there's various hours that people can have that are specifically non-productive. So, for example, if we have hired a nurse to do sort of 75 hours over 2 weeks, and we haven't used all those hours, then that can be an indicator of something we need to look at as well. We can also look at percentage-wise in terms of our rostering. So how often did we have people that were above the numbers that we needed in at that point, and what percentage of time we had those. We can have all sorts of lost hours in different circumstances, so it's worth looking at those. And job planning inaccuracies always worth looking at. So specifically, when we had a plan, to what extent did we follow that? So if at any point we've had too many people in against the job plan, that is obviously a problem, because we've got too much capacity in against the demand that we expected. So understanding those sort of things are things you can look at here. It's about effectiveness and getting the best out of the people that we have. From a redesign point of view, we can look at all sorts of different things. So I mentioned earlier in the wrong place, demand. So when it comes to looking at metrics, you might want to say, well, how have we influenced demand compared to where we expected it to be? Have we managed to bring demand down through the actions that we wanted to have upstream? Because that might have been an indicator that said we needed fewer staff if we can influence demand. Well, if we don't influence demand, all we've got is an overworked workforce. We can look at actions against plan. So specifically, have we done the actions that we expected to do? What percentage we've done? People often sign up to those and then don't do those actions, so it's worth understanding those. It's worth looking at the productivity before and after the change. Again, if we're expecting to improve productivity, we need to make sure that we've had that productivity improvement. We can also look at specifically the change progress completed, which is looking at the change management elements that we followed through and making sure that we've done those elements. That's a good indicator of whether things are going to succeed or not. And getting feedback from new roles, both from the staff and the staff that were the staff that they work with, to get their feedback on those. That's quite qualitative metrics, but we can collect them if we collect them in such a way that we record them quantitatively. Then they still can be shown quite purely as metrics. So redesign is important. I think we're getting to the end. We are return, even I get bored of the R's after a while. Returning ones are interesting. Number of returners, OBS. So how many people in general did we get returning to work? If we were hoping to get 10,000 nurses to return to work, how many did we get returning? The percentage of returners, so not just the number, but the percentage, as in of a total 100 people retired, we got 99 back. That means we've got a 99% of people returned. Great maths there. The percentage of retirees for whom return planning was undertaken. So this goes back to the action that you need to have is to, when somebody is retiring, you need to have a proper return conversation with them, certainly preferably before they retire. And we need to know the percentage of those. Obviously that should be as high as possible. And then obviously understanding the reasons for return is important as well. Qualitative information, but still very, very important. If I was to summarise the actions that you might have, it's there in very small writing with the required blue circles. Lots of things to think about from a metrics point of view. I say I'm sure you can think of more. I'm sure I can think of more if required. But I think there's a fair amount there to get at. The key element is to do it in a mindful way and think about why do I need these metrics and not randomly have lots of metrics that we're not using. So that is it on metrics. Fairly short one there, I think. What are your next steps? Well, don't forget to register to Wrapped if you want to. Please buy the bumper book of Health and Care Workforce Planning. It includes a little section on metrics with a lot of this stuff written down, as well as all the other stuff covered in all the other courses written down in a handy little book. Please visit the WRAP website, the Health Education England websites, and Carados websites for more management training and resources. If you go on Carados, you can always email me through that website, and I can send you other resources. Please start or continue the Wrapped Plan course, which is where this could fit, the Wrapped Hub course, which is where this could fit, or the Redesign course, or the Frontline course. There's a whole load of other courses available on that there YouTube. Thanks all for your time. I hope this has been useful. Please leave a comment, subscribe, ding the bell. What's the other thing you want to do? Like it. That's it. Try and do any of those things if you can. That will be great. Have a great day.